Okay, hello. Hope everyone's doing well. This is going to be a kind of a summary of Module 1 for the computer concepts portion of the course. And this is impact of digital technology. I want to go, first of all, before we start this is not, I said this before on another video, that this is not a substitute for the readings. The result of this module is there's going to be about a 60 question true or false and multiple choice test. And the best way to do well on that is to go ahead and read the text. When you read in the text, you'll notice there's certain words and concepts that are highlighted. In my book, they're purple. They might be a slightly different color in your online text. But those are going to be the concepts that they're looking for during the test. So when you see that in that kind of dark purple or a bolded color, you want to spend a minute or two taking a look at that. And we'll cover a lot of that in the next less than 30 minutes. But again, it's no substitute for actually going in and reading the text. Again, you can use the text on the test. So I would advise that as well, to kind of have the text open in a separate window. And if you have questions, just be familiar enough with the text to be able to go back and be able to take a look at that. So the other thing is that I'm going to probably do this in a few videos to keep it shorter than 30 minutes. So I'll probably cover each one of the sections in a short video. That way, if you have questions about a portion of it, you can actually come back to it and just look at that part of the video, okay? So the objectives, there's 3 objectives for this one, to look at the evolution of society's reliance in technology. That's covered in section 1.1 of the text. The second one is to look at personal uses of technology and see how they help with productivity, learning, and career growth. That's in section 1.2. And finally, we're going to take a brief look at the role of technology in the professional world, which basically just means it's everywhere. So, and that's in sections 1.3. So this video here will cover section 1.1. I'll have a second and third video probably that'll cover section 1.2 and 1.3. We'll see how long this takes. Okay. And again, I'll try to highlight some of the things I think are important for you to know and also that are important for the test throughout it. So the first one, evolution of reliance. We're going to look at 4 brief topics: the history of computers, impact of Internet of Things, discuss something about artificial intelligence, which we'll talk about in the second subject or second topic a little as well, and then look a little at virtual reality. Okay, so I don't think there's any way that you can't say that you don't rely on technology. When I was younger, we didn't have computers, or we had computers, but they looked more like this. So computers have changed. The first computer was actually called the ENIAC. I have a picture of it a little bit later, but it had this concept of used vacuum tubes to create switching, and the switching is how you actually did arithmetic operations in computers. So as you can see from this one, since they're tubes, they're big, and they also were very hot. So they would blow out quite often, and you had to have large rooms so you get good ventilation. And then over time, what's occurred is they've moved from vacuum tubes to transistors to integrated circuit chips to microprocessors, which is kind of where we live today. And if you can just take a look at the numbers there. So there's a vacuum tube, which represents kind of one switch. They moved to transistors, which you can see right there, are much smaller, and they're also a lot cooler. So they don't require, they don't operate give us much heat, so they don't require the same type of cooling and size. So right there, just between the first generation and the second generation, you can see it's gotten a lot smaller. Once you get to the integrated circuit or IC chip, the third generation, you can see there where you could get 167 transistors onto that one chip there on the kind of in the center of the screen. Whereas the next one over, which was just a little bit later than that, you went from 167 to 3,500 transistors. And by the time you get to the microprocessor, you're at the 2.6 billion transistors. So think of it in this way: that microchip, which is probably, or the microprocessor at the end, which is probably let's just say 1 inch by 1 inch, so maybe slightly larger than a postage stamp, actually was the equivalent of 2,600,000 vacuum tubes. So you can see one of the big implications here is that as we've moved from vacuum tubes over time to microprocessors, things have gotten a lot smaller. So whereas you had a computer that looked like this or like this in terms of the size, you could get the same power. And like your phone that you probably have with you right now is I'll say millions, thousands, and maybe millions of times more powerful than what you're looking at here, which took a whole room and several people just to operate. And when it goes from that type of size and impact to something you put in your pocket, it obviously is going to have an impact on your life. So this is one of the first computers. It resulted in this, which was the first personal computer, which was created by Apple, which let you take something that we just saw in that previous picture and bring it home to your house. In your home, then you can start to do things like, so for example, when I was growing up, you had a typewriter and you had to type, and sometimes you messed up and you had to start all over. Today, when you folks create papers, you can use word processing. And if you make a mistake, you just backspace over that and retype it. So just to think in terms of the amount of time and effort it took to write a paper, 30 or 40 years ago versus the amount of time it takes today. It just has a huge increase in your productivity and just leaves up time for you to do other things, to explore subjects a lot more in depth in terms of understanding the subjects versus just having to allocate hours and hours just typing what you learned. And that's continued down through to this Internet of Things, which even if you don't know what the term Internet of Things means, you'll know what it is when I talk about it. It's just computers that are now embedded into everything. So there are lots of examples of that where there's not necessarily a screen. If anybody has kind of a more modern thermostat where you can control it with your phone, like the Nest, for example, that's an example of something in the Internet of Things. A couple other different ones, in your car, if some self-driving cars or cars that park themselves, or heart rate sensors if you have an Apple Watch or some other type of smart watch, appliances like coffee makers or alarm clocks, or even the Hue lights, or the ability to use Amazon Alexa to turn lights on and off. All these things are example of how computers have gotten to be so small that they can be embedded inside of things that you use every day. And if you ever lose power now, if you have a house that's completely set up with Alexa to turn things on and off, and somehow the internet goes down or your Wi-Fi goes down, you can't do anything. So whereas maybe back in the 1800s, if you had a power outage in the late 1800s when there was power, it didn't affect many people. Today you get a power outage or you lose your phone and your whole world comes to a screeching halt. Artificial intelligence, just using logic and different experience to simulate human intelligence. So it's not really intelligent, it just looks intelligent, which is why it's called artificial intelligence. You see that in speech recognition or virtual reality, different things where it feels like the computer is thinking for you or anticipating what you're doing, but it actually is just simulating that use. But again, something like parallel parking, which is still a challenge for many people, now you have cars that do it for you. There's different types of virtual reality. In a sense, virtual reality, and actually I have this slide flip-flop, so I apologize for that. Virtual reality, which is the use of computers to simulate a real or imagined environment, is really something more along on the right-hand picture there, which is from Ready Player One. It's a whole individual reality. If you ever have played any of those Oculus games where you step into something, it's pretty cool, but everything around it is virtual. Whereas the picture on the left there represents more augmented reality, which is a type of virtual reality. So if you played Pokemon Go or something like that, where you're looking at a picture of the real world, but then you see something superimposed on top of it, that's augmented reality. They do a lot of this with GPS and other navigational devices where you kind of look at, if you look at this picture of the street like that, it might have an arrow painted onto the ground on the phone that shows you which direction to walk. So again, don't screw this up here, and just because I screwed up, the virtual reality picture is really the one on the right, and the augmented one is one on the left. But augmented reality is still using some existing reality and adding to it, which is what augmented mean. Whereas virtual reality is really the entire thing is it's simulated.